everybody, this is Tyler here once again from the Character Workshop, and we're finally back to recording AK from England the old-fashioned way. So, back to doing Doctor Who reviews. We're going to be reviewing story number 7 of the classic series of the show, and just in general. And funny enough, out of all the Season 1 stories, this is probably the one that, like, a lot of people don't talk about too much, and, you know, I've always kind of wondered why. But I think after watching this story for the purpose of this review, I think I probably know why. So today we're going to be taking a look at the Sensorites. So the story starts out with the Doctor, Barbara, Ian, and Susan landing on a spaceship where they meet 2 crew members by the names of Captain Maitland and Carol. And those 2 people were on an exploration mission from Earth into an area called the Sensphere. However, while they were orbiting the area, the inhabitants of it, which were referred to as the Sensorites, of course, refused to let them leave their orbits. And eventually, after the end of Part 1 and towards the beginning of Part 2, the Sensorites themselves visits the spaceship and stop the Doctor and his crew from leaving while setting everybody on a collision course, which, of course, the first Doctor thankfully diverts them from. Meanwhile, Barbara and Susan, while being trapped in a part of the spaceship, eventually find another crew member of the ship, who is Carol's fiance by the name of John, whose mind was broken by the Sensorites, and the Sensorites, as I did mention earlier, they had the ability to, communicate to each other by mind reading, and also, being able to manipulate, people's minds who aren't strong against theirs, basically. And during the course of, parts 2 and 3, Susan was able to communicate to the Sensorites through telepathy, and of course her mind was flooded by the many voices of them, and the Sensorites themselves were pretty, scared of the travelers, and were trying to, communicate with her to, try to find some compromise. And during the story, the Doctor basically calculates that the only reason the Sensorites attacked John was because he was apparently a mineralogist, and he discovered a vast supply of molybdenum. I might have mispronounced that name. I honestly forgot how they pronounce it on the show, since, I'm recording this review a day after I watched, I finished the story. And Susan then reported that the Sensorites wished to make contact with, the crew, as I mentioned earlier. And they asked them to board the Sensphere, and eventually revealed that a previous Earth expedition caused the Sensorites great misery. The Doctor then asks the Sensorites to return the TARDIS's lock in exchange for visiting the Sensphere to speak with their leader. So, eventually, Ian, Susan, Carol, and John eventually join the Doctor in going to the Sensphere. While everybody was on the Sensphere, they learned that the previous Earth visitors in there exploited the Sensphere for their wealth, and half of the members stole their spacecraft, which ended up exploding on takeoff. And because of this, the Sensorite Council was divided over the issue of inviting, the Doctor and everybody else into the Sensphere. Still, the members of the Council throughout the story had a plot to kill them all on arrival, but the others, believed that the humans could help them with a disease that was currently killing many of their members. And when their first plot was foiled by other Sensorites, they continued to plot in secret. The members of the council that were, trying to, sabotage, the humans. And eventually John's mind was unblocked by, Sensorite, influence. However, while, the Dr. Susan, Ian were interacting with the first elder of the Sensorites, they were drinking crystallized water, but Ian eventually contracted a disease that, has been, killing many of the Sensorites, and was told that Ian was gonna die, and, apparently the water that he got it from was poisoned by the drinking water from the aqueduct. So then, despite, the first elder, discouraging them from going to the aqueduct, the Doctor goes there to try and find a cure for Ian. Meanwhile, during the story, the plotting Sensorites capture and impersonates the second elder of the Sensorites. While going inside the aqueduct, the Doctor finds strange noises and darkness in there, which, in this story it was revealed that the Sensorites, hate going into the dark, so that's why none of them bother going into the aqueduct. And the Doctor eventually removes some deadly nightshade, which apparently was the cause of the poisoning. But while he was trying to retrieve it, he meets like an unseen monster. And because it was taking the Doctor so long to come back, Susan and Ian decide to, leave the presence of the First Elder and go to the aqueduct to try and find the Doctor, who was apparently unconscious but also unharmed. And while he was recovering, he tells of his suspicion about that some of the Sensorites are actually plotting to kill the humans, which I've brought up earlier. And the plotting Sensorites kill the Second Elder, and one of the Sensorites, who is also, I believe, the city administrator, takes over as the Second Elder in that position. John eventually tells the others that he knows about the city administrator, leading the plot into killing the humans, but says he is now too powerful, so the Doctor and Ian go down to the aqueduct to find the poisoners. So, elsewhere, there was another Sensorite who apparently abducted Carol, but eventually Susan, John, and Barbara, which, by the way, there was a good portion of this story where, Barbara was not seen, and that was really kind of out of nowhere that she was brought back, just for the purpose of the story, but anyway, they eventually find Carol, and they released her from the Sensorite that was trying to capture her. And, on discovering the tampered tools, everybody goes into the aqueduct to try and rescue the Doctor and Ian, and the leader eventually discovers the Sensorite plotters a little while later. Meanwhile, Ian and the Doctor discover that the monsters were actually just human survivors from the previous Earth mission, and they were the ones that had been poisoning the Sensorites. And the commander led them to the surface, where they are arrested by the Sensorites, of course. And the Doctor and his party return to the city, pleading clemency for the prisoners. The leader of the Sensorites agrees to this, and sends everybody back with Maitland, John, and Carol to Earth for treatments, and then eventually the Doctor, Ian, Barbara, and Susan eventually got back into the TARDIS to travel elsewhere. So yeah, that was basically the Sensorites in a nutshell. And as I mentioned earlier in this episode, I was wondering why, out of all the Season 1 stories of Doctor Who, the classic series, this is often the one that gets the least talked about by everybody. And after watching the story, I can see why. It's, honestly, for the most part, this story was kind of dull. Didn't really get too much into it. That's kind of why I actually, going into this, I split my viewing of the episode in 2 days. One day I watched the first 3 episodes, and then the next day I watched episodes 4, 5, and 6. But yeah, it honestly just, wasn't the most interesting. I don't really have too much to say about it. I will say, a few positives about the story, though. I do honestly like the makeup they use for the Sensorites, their faces. It honestly is a very interesting design. I will say it's definitely something I've never seen before, so I will give them props for that. Obviously, their costumes don't have too much going on, and also their feet look a little weird. They're very flat and round. So they're kind of like duck feet in a way, and honestly, I'm kind of glad they didn't show their feet that much, because that just did not look good. Another positive about the story is obviously the characters and their actors. I do think everybody pretty much does a good job of the episode, including the main 4 cast members, Dr. Ian, Barbara, Susan, and I obviously do like the 3 human characters that are in the story, Maitland, Carol, and John. Although after part 3, we never really got to see too much of Maitland. He's just been on the spaceship throughout the rest of the story. We don't see him. So the primary human characters throughout the rest of the Sensorites were pretty much just Carol and John, and I obviously do like seeing them as characters, and seeing John recovered was definitely a very noticeable difference compared to what he was earlier in the story, where he was kind of like, a bit like nervous and deranged in a way. So it was really interesting. I do like that. So, speaking on the topic of Captain Maitland not showing up throughout most of the story, the Sensorites had a huge, and I mean huge, lack of Barbara. She was, heavily in the first two parts of the story, and was a little bit in part 3, and eventually, just like Captain Maitland, she was just stuck on the spaceship throughout most of the story, but eventually, Dr. Ian and Susan, asked the Sensorites to bring her back down in part 6, and Barbara was there, and yeah, it was... I always found it, kind of weird how in some of these classic Who stories, like, there's episodes where some of the companions or some of the characters, like, just don't show up at all. Like, for example, I mentioned in my review of The Keys of Marinus a while ago where it was really weird that episodes 3 and 4 did not have the Doctor in there at all, and that just kind of made The Keys of Marinus a little bit strange, in my opinion. And that's kind of the case with the Sensorites, where Barbara was absent throughout half of the story, and which is kind of a shame, because she was definitely, like, between her, Ian, and Susan, she was definitely the best of the companions. But honestly, I do like, that's something I forgot to mention, kind of like with the Aztecs. So the Sensorites was kind of another story that, like, Susan didn't, like, be her overdramatic, scream persona. Susan was kind of handled decently well in this story. There was a scene, I believe it was either episode 2 or 3, it might have been episode 2, where the Doctor kind of scolded her for, like, being in contact with the Sensorites, and Susan was arguing with him, like, oh, you can't treat me like a baby anymore, I'm not a child anymore, and, they kind of argued a little bit, and the Doctor literally admitted to one of the Sensorites later on, where he said, me and my granddaughter have never argued, but you made us do it, and it was an interesting scene. I do like that. One of the few times where I think we actually kind of got a glimpse of, like, Susan kind of sort of improving as a character, but, like, not really too much else besides that. Yeah. The characters, as a whole in the story were pretty good. It was weird not seeing Barbara throughout it, but, that was, other than that, it was fine. So honestly, I think that would be about it for my review and discussion of the Sensorites. Story itself is mediocre. The designs of the Sensorites are pretty interesting, besides, their clothing and their feet. But the characters are portrayed very well in the story, even though there's, like, a lack of Barbara in, the middle part of the story. That honestly kind of drags the Sensorites down a little bit. And so for some of those reasons alone, I'm probably going to give the Sensorites probably my lowest score in my Doctor Who reviews so far. I'm going to give that story probably a 6 out of 10. So hopefully you guys enjoyed my review and discussion of the Sensorites, and if you did, feel free to give it a like, subscribe to the channel if you want to see more episodes of A Cave from England or just mediocre plush content in general. Also be sure to turn on the notification bell so you get notified each time I upload a new episode of this show or any other show on my channel. Leave a comment down below letting me know what you think. That is about it. This is Tyler from the Character Workshop, signing out. Next time we do another Doctor Who review, we finally finish off Season 1 for now. Well, until they animate Marco Polo. But we talk about the Season 1 finale of classic Doctor Who. And then I'm going to be excited for this one, because I have never seen this story before.